Mental illness can occur in any family, but it can also seem to run in families. Why? Well, joining us now to examine what links mental health across generations, we're joined in Stockbridge, Massachusetts by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, psychiatrist and author of The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. In Harlem, New York, Bianca Jones-Marlin, assistant professor of psychology and neuroscience at Columbia University and principal investigator at the Marlin Lab. In the Bronx, New York, Rachel Yehuda, professor of psychiatry and director of traumatic stress studies at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and director of mental health for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And at Bathurst and Dundas in the provincial capital, Dr. Roger McIntyre, professor of psychiatry and pharmacology at the University of Toronto and head of the Mood Disorders Psychopharmacology Unit at the University Health Network. Roger, it's good to see you again. You've been on this program numerous times, and to our other three guests in the U.S., we're glad to have you along for the first time as well. Let's get started by going back 3 decades, shall we? This is a quote from a 1991 book entitled The New Genetics of Mental Illness. And here's the quote. Growth in knowledge has occurred at a remarkable rate over the past 20 years following the advent of the so-called new genetics of DNA technology. One of the welcome side effects has been an increased public awareness of the importance of genetics and a new optimism about what the subject has to offer. Okay, Roger, take us back to the 90s and the Human Genome Project, and how would you describe the optimism that was in the air at that time in terms of understanding mental illness better?
Palpable. That would be the one word that comes to mind, Steve. At that time, we knew for decades that there was an element of the risk to mental illness broadly, some conditions more than others, that were really subserved by some type of genetic risk. And this was more than hinted at through family studies and in twin studies and a variety of community-based studies, all provided this very compelling story that there were genetics at play here. And really, it wasn't just for the academic, it was actually for the person whose life could possibly be affected by this condition. Because in other areas of medicine, there was also tremendous interest. We think about breast cancer, but many other examples where you could really, in fact, offer more precision, more personalized, and maybe even preventative approaches to a chronic disease state by knowing the genetics. So just as the promise was delivered in other areas of medicine around prevention and preemption, we were ecstatic about that possibility coming to us in the world of mental health.
Rachel, pick up the story if you would. Was that palpable in your judgment? Was that palpable optimism of the time? Did it pan out over the ensuing decades?
Well, there was optimism, and there was a growing recognition that mental diseases had a biologic component. So many people, when they think about biology, they think about genetics. They don't really think about the contribution of the environment to biology. And in the early 90s, the thinking was a little bit reductionist, that either something is in your mind or it's in your genes, and there wasn't a lot of in between there. But of course, as we got to know disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder better, and as we started to look at how the environment can impact our biology and even our genes, we began to have other options, because the truth is that mental illness does tend to run in families, but that doesn't necessarily make it genetic per se.
All right, let's pick up on that then with Bianca. When you look at the prevalence of mental illness in some families, to what extent can we say, well, it's in the genes and therefore you didn't win the lottery when it came to genetic good luck?
It's so difficult to answer this question when it comes to families. And my co-speakers on the call now, they do an amazing job at studying this in humans. And I look at mice. And the reason why I look at rodents to study this is because we can separate the offspring from the offspring from the parents, and really dig into this question biologically. It's hard to say if you've gotten your anxiety from your mother or your grandmother when they're sitting at the dinner table with you every night, when they're recalling stories of their traumatic past, how much of that is from your environment or how much of that is from your genetics if you had never interacted with them, and how much of that is the in-between, the epigenetic component, when your environment actually changes your genes and changes your behavior. And so I use mice to focus in on that, to say we can separate the offspring from the parents and really answer that question cleanly.
Bessel, can you weigh in on that as well? How much of it is just the genetic roll of the dice?
Well, despite billions of dollars of research, there has not been a single gene that has been found to predict mental illness. What is, as Rachel already started to allude to, we are deeply interpersonal creatures who are formed by our environment and our interactions with our environment. And there may be some genetic predisposition, but at the end, the environment is a very profound effect on the way it gets expressed. And longitudinal studies in both monkeys and human beings really show that it's really the quality of the caregiving relationships more than genes that really cause mental illness.
In which case, Roger, let's talk about trauma. Since the 90s, how has our understanding of the effect that trauma has in the role of mental illness, how has it changed?
I think what's changed is to pick up on something that Rachel started. I think we've moved away from a reductionistic model. This is just in the genetic architecture to a much more thoughtful, comprehensive, and really, frankly, evidence-based really consideration of trauma. Let me give you an example of where this really hits home. When we think about genetic risk, yes, it's the risk to declaring a mental illness, and one of the ways that is manifested is the age at onset. As a general statement, disorders that have more genetic risk and loading tend to present earlier in life rather than later in life. Now, mental illnesses are disparate. They're very different across their pathogenesis. Bipolar disorder, a well-known, serious, complex, and chronic disorder, has an estimated heritability of around 70%. That compares to major depression at around 30%. What's interesting is that in Europe, the age at onset of bipolar disorder on average is 26. In the United States, it's 13. So here's a condition with 70% heritability with a difference in age at onset by 10 years just across the pond. And what's so interesting about this incredibly heritable condition with such an incredible different age at onset is that in the United States, there's two things that really stand out. A much higher rate of reported childhood psychosocial adversity like trauma, neglect, and other aspects of insecurity. And secondly, assortative mating. In other words, procreating with phenotypes that look like me. Parents of people with bipolar disorder in the United States are more likely to have offspring with someone else who has a mental illness when compared to Europe. So you have this very interesting difference in the United States. There's a higher rate of trauma when compared to Europe. And you also have a higher rate of assortative mating in the United States in bipolar disorder than you do in Europe. So it really brings together and integrates what Rachel was getting at, the different aspects here, but clearly trauma is changing what we call the biotype. And maybe we'll hear from this from the book that we just heard about. It's all kept in your body, but certainly that changes the biology, not of brain, but also of body. And that likely changes risk and also changes other types of aspects. For example, other concurrent conditions that people might have with mental illness, like obesity and diabetes, which we also now know is closely linked to stress and trauma.
In which case, Rachel, can we now conclusively say that a better predictor of mental illness is not genetics, but in fact trauma, particularly if it happened early in life?
It's hard to say anything that's really conclusive in the field of mental health right now. That's one of the problems. But there's no question that environments matter and what happens matter. And even when trauma happens to children at a young age, the environment in which that trauma occurs matters. If a young child is traumatized in the context of a nurturing, caring environment where people are outraged on the child's behalf, that child will have a better mental health outcome than somebody who was neglected, who lives in a home where they're not being cared for or they're being neglected or even abused. So environments are important, but biology is important too. So we haven't sorted out how that combination works together, but we know both factors matter.
I do want to go, though, Bianca, a little further on this issue of childhood trauma, because, I mean, I suspect if I asked any of you to remember something that happened to you when you were 2 years old, not from other people's recollections of it, but from your own. I mean, we'd all have a hard time doing that. But how crucial are those years, years 1, 2, and 3, in terms of personal trauma leading to potential mental health after effects?
Those are the years we establish safety. We establish correspondences with our caregivers. And when those are broken, it does seem to predict that it leads to long-lasting changes. Now, as Rachel had mentioned before, if we're in a safe and warm, caring environment in which people are coming up and standing up for those who are abused, we're more likely to have a better outcome. And if that's followed through into adulthood, we're more likely to have a better outcome. But these are the developmental years in which we're understanding what it means to trust someone, to find safety in someone. And when those years become perturbed, for lack of better words, it does lead to long-lasting issues.
Let's do
this both in our mouse studies and in our human studies.
Right. Let's do an excerpt here from Bessel's book, The Body Keeps Score. We have learned that trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past, it is also the imprint left by that experience on mind, brain, and body. This imprint has ongoing consequences for how the human organism manages to survive in the present. Trauma results in a fundamental reorganization of the way mind and brain manage perceptions. It changes not only how we think and what we think about, but also our very capacity to think. Okay, Bessel, so when it comes to trauma, you write, the body keeps score. How does the body keep score?
Well, your survival part of the brain gets very activated if you're under threat, and you continue to secrete stress hormones, and you continue to react to your environment, anticipating bad things to happen, which sort of organizes your perception and the way that your mind and brain function, actually. So these early experiences really set the stage for how you perceive yourself and the world around you. And there are quite a few longitudinal studies of following kids for long periods over time, particularly the Minnesota longitudinal study, where they take high-risk kids, and they show basically that the quality of the caregiving at the end tends to compensate for a lot of what seems to be genetic loading. So if a kid feels secure and safe, and if the world is predictable, they develop a mind and a brain that can actually learn and take in information. But if that organism, that creature, is frightened all the time, it is shut down, cannot learn very much, and gets stuck in their development.
Let's do another quote here, this time from Harvard Magazine, and I'm going to read a little bit of an excerpt about the work of researcher Andrea Roberts. Roberts and her colleagues found much higher rates of depression among the children of abuse victims, between 1.5 and 2.5 times higher than children of non-abused mothers. She surmises that the problem could be behavioral. A mother who experienced abuse in childhood is more likely to be depressed in adulthood, and as a result, may be less attuned to her children, a neglect that can sow depression. Okay, Roger, start us off on this. To what extent does this explain why mental illness runs in families?
It certainly does, and there's animal work to in fact show that there is a biological transmission of this, so what we call biosignature of stress that's passed on to the next generation, and that's one, if you will, aspect. But the other aspect, which is contemporaneous, is clearly the environment. There's been plenty of work now to show that when the parental experience is one of depression in early, in this time neonate, early infancy, it really predisposes really a whole assortment of risks for that infant when later in life, or 3, 5, 6, 7 years old, with behavioral disorders, in mental disorders. What I think, though, Steve, is really interesting about where we've gone in psychiatry, we started off with our really enthusiasm about the genomic project, what it would promise us. We've talked about that, how gravity kicked in, brought us back down to earth a little bit. I think the other part that we've really maybe been somewhat asymmetric in our emphasis, we focus a lot on risk, but we have focused less on resiliency. And it's about risk and resiliency. And what is as interesting is the offspring of mom who may have been traumatized herself, who goes up to have a highly adaptive, functional life. What is it about that individual and that individual's environment that that individual may have created through a degree of self-refuge, if you will, that put that person on a more virtuous trajectory rather than, in fact, a more vicious trajectory. And that part's extremely interesting.
Bianca, I see you nodding your head. What would you add to that?
I'm so happy that resilience is taken into play because we want to focus not just on the negative component, but on the positive. Biology has a setup for survival. It's not here to ruin us. And so when we are set up for an area of survival where we need to be constantly alert for our safety, but that danger has been removed, that's when we have these issues. That's when post PTSD, for example, becomes an issue, when anxiety becomes an issue, because we're prepared to fight or prepared to flee, but there's no danger present. It's biology really setting us up to survive, but when the danger is removed, and then this is when we have these issues.
Rachel, I wonder if you could pick up the story from this standpoint. Do you think it's all in the genes view of why mental illness runs in families can become an obstacle for people to actually consider the role that trauma may play in their mental illness?
It can be an obstacle. Some people find it validating. There's not a lot of evidence for it. That's the problem. And there's a lot more evidence for the fact that environment and even intergenerational environments can pack more of a punch and really have more of an influence. And around the conversation of resilience or vulnerability, I don't actually make that distinction. When parents maybe pass on, for example, an epigenetic change to their offspring, maybe it's designed to help them cope better with their environments. We don't really see a correlation between an epigenetic change in an offspring of trauma survivors and their pathology per se. So it's pretty complicated. If you are exposed to a very dangerous situation, your body learns from it. It carries a scar from it also, but it also carries a memory to do better next time. And so what we might transmit down the line is an ancestral memory that helps us cope and survive. So we have to be really careful about looking at any biologic aspect following trauma and claiming that that must be something bad. Trauma might be something we want to avoid, but the body's response to trauma is really meant to help. Sometimes the trauma is overwhelming or the ongoing circumstance prevents that kind of help, but these are really complicated. What it boils down to in the end is that if we can make our environments better, we can override negative impacts of vulnerability genes and other kinds of experiences. We can't change our genes. Genes are only going to account for a very small proportion of the problem. We can make massive changes in our environments and our policies, and that's going to be the road to providing better mental health for people.
Well, let me pick up on that with Bessel. I would imagine right now there are people watching us or listening to us who have a parent who has suffered through episodes of mental illness. And if they themselves are wondering, how do I make sure that doesn't happen to me, or what are my chances of that happening to me, what advice would you give them right now?
It doesn't get passed on. You know, we are extremely flexible human beings, and even if you are a really scared and insecurely attached 6-year-old, if you're lucky enough at age 16 to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend who really loves you, you can still change and pick up new experiences and that really reshape you. We're continuously being reshaped, and so it's not like what happens to you at age 3 is going to predict everything that will happen, because we're continuously evolving, and new relationships and new skills and new capacities can build on top of that. And we are flexible human beings, and we evolve in various directions depending on life experiences and on an ongoing basis. What's also striking is that psychiatry has largely relied on drugs to change people, and that was a terrible, terrible direction for psychiatry to go into. That, if something is wrong, you must be given the right drug for it, and so psychiatry became a servant of the drug industry. But real treatment like neurofeedback and theater and psychedelics and all those things barely get explored, and there's hardly any money to do research into how can we really change people to live in bodies and brains that feel secure and safe.
All right, let's get into some discussion now about nature and how it might change, how nurture might change nature. And we touched on this earlier, but we want to go a little deeper here, and that's epigenetics, how you're influenced by your environment. And we want to start setting up this part of our conversation by just showing a snippet of a piece. And Bianca, I think you're featured in this and some of the work you do. So let's take a look at this, and then we'll come back and chat. Sheldon, if you would, the clip.
So at the end of World War II, an experience called the Dutch Hunger Winter occurred. And during this time, people in the Netherlands were starved of food. Their children and their grandchildren were observed to suffer from increased rates of metabolic issues, for example, diabetes, high blood pressure, and even schizophrenia. It wasn't just children that were conceived during the famine, but children that were conceived afterwards, as if the sex cells, the sperm cells and the egg cells, had a memory of that trauma, of that stress, well beyond the years of famine. It really did spark questions in the scientific community of how can a memory, a message, live on in sperm and egg, and how is it being passed down?
That is just a stunning revelation. And in your lab, I gather, you have been able to demonstrate how traumatic memory can be passed down even through mice. Explain, if you would.
Yes, we're digging through this very heavy question of how sex cells, sperm cells, and egg cells can somehow encapsulate this memory. And this memory may be encapsulated through the epigenetic component that we're speaking about, certain markers that can change the way our genetics are read, and how that can be passed on. And not only passed on in how the mouse, quote unquote, feels, but actual morphological changes in the brain, how neurons in the brain actually fire and how they grow, and therefore how it changes their behavior.
Amazing. Rachel, let me ask you to pick up the story, because I know you've done research as well on descendants of Holocaust survivors from World War II. What can you tell us about that?
Well, what I can tell you is that there are epigenetic changes in the offspring, but it's really complicated. I cannot tell you that all of those epigenetic changes are associated with vulnerability. Some seem to be associated with having less anxiety as an adult. And what seems to matter in terms of the effects that we see in offspring have to do with not only what happened to the parent, but the gender of the parent, and also the time and development that it happened. So you see a very different profile in offspring whose mother, for example, was younger during the Holocaust than a mother who's older. So it's really, really complicated. What's very important when you talk about like the legacy of something like the Holocaust is to understand that it wasn't just a moment in time. There were things that happened afterwards. And as Bessel said so correctly, you keep having experiences. So if experience changes the way your genes function, it doesn't just happen once and then you're stuck with it. It's a very fluid and developmental thing. So for many people who are trauma exposed, when it was over, they were embraced and then it really was over for them. And for other people, they continued to struggle. So really, I think this is, again, back to a very important point. People get a little nervous when they hear about genetics and epigenetics and the body keeps the score. These are messages that sometimes make people think that they're doomed. But actually, the message is just the opposite. The message is that your body will incorporate a positive change just as it incorporates a negative change. So if a negative event or a trauma has the body to change you, a positive event has the potential to change you too. And that's what we should be learning from all of this. With genetics, those are your genes, and you're going to have those genes for the rest of your life. And the way that those genes look is not going to change. But you can make dramatic changes in the way you function because of the things that happen to you. And that's really the important message, I think, of neuroscience right now and applying studies of stress to people, that change is really possible, even though, ironically, experiences are carried with us. So let's just have more positive experiences and make sure that we help people who have had negative experiences have the countervailing positive experiences that will mitigate against mental illness.
Bianca, that's a hugely important factor, I guess, to get on the record here, because, of course, media tend to focus a lot on the negative. And I guess we should give equal time to the notion, and I presume you agree with it, that positive experiences can also be passed down through the generation. Is that right?
Yes, and I would understand their focus in focusing on the negative, because the negative is the survival aspect. This is whether or not you will live for the next generation. And what Dr. Yehuda beautifully stated, and her work beautifully states, is that for some people, past Dutch hunger winter, this was a moment in time in which they could now find safety. And for others, it survived longer. And we see those metabolic, in this case, metabolic changes that occurred for a longer period of time, but not in everyone. There are other populations, for example, here in the United States, ADOS, African American descendants of slaves, who for many years suffered starvation and trauma. And so how much of that period of time do we need of positivity to reflect the changes we see in metabolic issues such as hypertension, diabetes, high blood pressure, depression, et cetera? And so it's essential to focus on the positive as well, but not ignoring that the negative is what we need for survival, and then the positive can be added on top.
You asked a good question there. Do you know the answer? How many generations it does take for positive to kick in?
Well, I study mice and not humans, so hopefully I know the answer soon.
All right. Well, let me... Go ahead, please. Yes.
Say, I mean, that's such an important thing that you just said. For somebody that is loaded to have metabolic illness, it's particularly important to make sure that a good diet is available to them, because that is going to be something that will help reverse whatever the predisposition is for metabolic syndrome. Because we know that metabolic syndrome, even if you have it in real time, is something that can be greatly improved by making the correct dietary choices. So what we have to do when we understand that there is a vulnerability is take corrective actions so that we could reduce the number of generations that are affected. The answer to that question, though, is to really prove that something truly passes through the sex cells. It requires 4 generations. Because the in utero effects that occur because of a sperm or an egg epigenetic effect can affect the mother, it can affect the fetus, and of course it can affect the fetus's germ cells. So in order to have an effect beyond that, you have to look at the 4th generation, which is why these issues are really complicated, particularly in people.
Indeed. So, Roger, do we need to just simply get rid of this whole nature versus nurture debate to begin with?
Short answer is yes. I mean, that's been stale data for such a long time. And Steve, the entire planet is witnessing a trauma at the current time called COVID-19. And this is a triple threat. This isn't just a public health crisis. This is an economic crisis. This is a mental health crisis. And what walked into this pandemic was a pandemic of loneliness. And one of the key factors, we talk about a positive experience. In some ways, that feels like just say no to drugs. A little easier to say than it is to do. And when we talk about create a positive experience, that's intriguing. How does the individual create a virtuous world for themselves through refuge and finding areas of safety, creating an environment where they can accrue socially valued credentials, degrees, and economically make yourself secure? What's been laid bare and exacerbated by COVID-19 is social determinants and how they, in fact, are different across our population. And in our society around the world, high, middle, low-income countries, some people are especially traumatized right now. And what's really replicated is 2 factors: loneliness and lack of social engagement. And secondly, some of these social determinants of economic security and and housing security. So absolutely, we have to create the positive environment, but we already have wonderful data, unfortunately, through this tragedy of COVID-19 that's instantiated the power of these social determinants admixed with individual factors, and a factor we say so little about, loneliness, and the importance of social engagement and social cohesion as the ultimate vaccination against some of the risks that we're talking about.
Don't forget to Zoom your friends, everybody who's watching this. Bessel, you wanted to add.
Well, I was one of these kids you just saw in the movie. That was my generation. Very hundreds of thousands of kids of my generation died. And I was a very, very sickly child. And I have the memory still in my body of starting off like that. And much of my research actually is based on all research is research on how do you help people like that, who I once was, to overcome that. And what has been distressing in our field is that our resources go into high-tech solutions, and we really don't explore very carefully what can best help people. And for example, I did an NIH-funded study on yoga for PTSD. It turned out that yoga is very effective. Working with your body and feeling safe in your body is very important. I've not seen a single psychiatry department incorporate a yoga program in or as a substitute for psychopharmacology. And so we keep looking under one tree, but we really are not really looking carefully at how can we repair and undo the damage. We are much more interested in finding the underlying biochemical causes than what can we actually do to actually repair the damage that's being done, and including the damage to biological systems.
Bessel, we're down to our last minute here, unfortunately, but I'm so curious to follow up on what you just said. Given your background, how did you turn out so well?
Luck.
Got to be more than that.
No, most people I grew up with have done extremely well. For one thing, the Netherlands happens to be sort of a pretty reasonable country with very good social provisions, and so there is much less income inequality there, and much more support to young mothers and families to raise their children. So I went actually through wonderful school systems where we played and we had animals, and it's very much an early environment that really nurtures children and it allows children to play and to grow and to be creative. That is what makes a difference. It's nice to find the dopamine factors, but they're great, wonderful, I'm all for it. But what really helps people is the real question here.
I want to thank all four of you for coming on to TVO tonight and sharing your views. That was an absolutely illuminating and outstanding conversation. Bianca Jones-Marlin, Rachel Yehuda, Bessel van der Kolk, Roger McIntyre. Stay safe out there, everybody. And again, many thanks for spending so much time with us on TVO tonight.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.